Good morning, everyone. My name is Suzanne Templin, and I coordinate the webinars for Houseman Johnson Insurance. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Set Up Your Own Safety Program, presented by Rich Johnston. Today's webinar will run about 45 minutes. After the webinar, we will have a question and answer session. If you have a question during the webinar, feel free to type it into the question feature, and Rich will address it during the Q&A portion. After the webinar is over, there will be a short survey we are hoping you can fill out for us. A note that this webinar has been certified for continuing education credits by the Society for Human Resources Management and the Human Resources Certification Institute. Details on those credits will be provided to you at the conclusion of this webinar. Also, please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for review on the webinar archives of our website. If you do not want to participate in a recorded webinar, you may want to close the application at this time. You will receive a follow-up email from the GoToWebinar application later today or tomorrow. I would now like to introduce you to our presenter for today's webinar, Rich Johnston. With over 25 years of experience in health and safety, Rich is passionate about simplifying the complex world of risk management for the clients of Houseman Johnson Insurance. He takes pride in helping clients reduce workplace injury. Rich has specialized knowledge of health and safety program development, industrial hygiene, mold assessment, and employee training development. His previous experiences include working for OSHA in New Mexico, running the Wisconsin DNR Safety Office, and acting as an OSHA consultant. All of this experience makes Rich a guiding hand for clients who find themselves involved in OSHA negotiations. He has a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and we are very thankful that he could share some of his wisdom with us today. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I hope it's okay to say, but we have about over 70 people registered for this, so greetings to all of you out there. I made a record attendance on this one, so looking forward to it. I hope we can give you something of value. The agenda is as shown above. We're going to talk about OSHA regulations. We're going to talk about conducting job hazards and selecting the regulations. And you can read this pretty much as it's written as far as the things we're going to go through. It will take about 45 minutes to go through all of this stuff if we can give you the details. And by all means, if you have questions, there is a protocol for typing those in, and I'll be glad to answer those in our Q&A session and about 9:30. So as we get into this, the first thing that any business has to do is determine whether you are in the general industry standards or the construction standards. OSHA in reality has about 5 different standard bodies. There's one for marine, there's one for agriculture, there's one for general industry, there's one for construction. And the easiest way to do that, we'll only deal with the general industry one, 29 CFR 1910, and the construction one, which is 29 CFR 1926. The way to make a determination as to whether you're in one or the other is in the task that's being done. In this case, I'm going to drop down to the construction one first. If you are involved in a business that builds new, starting from a hole in the ground up to the building, that is considered construction. On the other hand, if you are in a business that is in manufacturing or maintenance or repair, then you're in general industry. So if you're a construction contractor and all you are doing is, I should say all you're doing, what your primary job model or business model is repairing or doing maintenance. Even putting a new roof on, for instance, is not considered construction because you're just replacing something. On the other hand, if you tear down the walls to the foundation and build it back up again, that's construction. So it's all about new. It's the maintenance and repair where people get confused. Manufacturing is pretty obvious. You're making a product, but again, it's the maintenance one. Many questions we get on the landscaping industry, where are they? Well, they're kind of in that gray area between both of them because they do lay down new lawn, which would be considered construction, and yet at the same time they do maintenance and repair, which would be in the general industry side of it. So sometimes it's really clear, sometimes it's muddy. But again, this is the way you make that decision. If you do nothing but build new, you're construction. If you maintain or repair, you're in general industry. That's the first thing you want to know how to make that decision on. Fairly simple. Like I said, I'm not going into the regulations. Now, warning. I'm sure many of you have, if you have not done it yourself, you know people who have. And that is you go online, you find a company that sells, they guarantee it's a safety program, and you buy this and have it and you will be OSHA compliant. Frankly, what you get is not bad. It's just way too generic. I can remember an inspection that I did as a compliance officer, and I was sitting in the office doing the interview component, and I asked the owner, I said, so do you have a safety program? And he said, oh yes, we do. I'm very proud of it. We have it complete. And he handed me one of three-ring binders from a well-known supplier. The plastic wrap was still on it. And he said, we have a safety program. And I said, no, you don't. And I cited him. That is not a safety program. What you get can be a safety program in the end, but needs a whole lot of work. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how you take those generic programs. And again, quite honestly, you don't need to buy safety programs. Even though they're sold online and from suppliers here in Wisconsin, you don't need to buy them. I have almost every one that's needed as far as a template. The OSHA consultation program has them. You can find them online. They're all free. We don't know who originally wrote these things, but they are still there and get used a lot. So don't buy one. Just feel free to use the resources that you have and to begin the process. And again, you're just doing the basic setups when you buy those, when you get those programs. Now, task one, and this is where you have to start. Now, what you're looking at, if you don't have a written safety program now, this is not a difficult task, but it is a very time-consuming task. And sadly, it's one of those things that falls to the wayside when there are production pressures, when perhaps the budget isn't as good as it should be, or you're all marketing for new work. It falls to the wayside and doesn't get done. So the advantage of having, and I'm not promoting the professional safety and health profession, but I am, if you had a full-time safety director, that is what they're going to do. They're going to spend their time doing they know how to do it. Every one of us knows how to do this properly. And it's nice to have one person dedicated to doing this, because that's all they're going to be doing. And it is going to take probably 2 to 3 years to get it done. It's not something that can be done in a day or in a month or a week. It's an ongoing process. And then once it's done, it has to be reevaluated and modified and updated so that it's a living document. It's a living program. So the first thing we're going to do as we get started is we're going to determine what hazards are in our workplace. And you need to do that by looking at the jobs that you have. What are the tasks? What are the tools used? Who does them? Do they get up on an elevation? Do they use any particular type of equipment? Do they use a chemical of any form? Those need to be broken down. The easiest way to do that is do it by job description. And again, the goal is to identify within that specific job what are the hazards that exist that could injure or cause an illness in an employee. Probably the easiest thing I can say is if you use ladders, if your employees use ladders, there's a whole ladder standard. And interestingly enough, falls in construction off of ladders is the #1 form of the #1 cause of workplace fatalities. So, and again, it's a highlight, or it's an emphasis for OSHA right now, is ladder safety. If you don't have there would be a good place. That's an example of a hazard identification. You look at it, you see it, well, they could fall off of that. If you get up on elevations, well, there's a slip, trips, falls standard which deals with elevation. In manufacturing, it's anything over 4 feet. In construction, it's anything over 6 feet as far as elevation goes. So you need to look at each one of those tasks. Now, this is a huge beastie, and do not try to do it in one bite. My recommendation to anybody is, as you start on this, identify your most common task first and take it through to completion. Don't do anything else until you get that one particular job description highlighted in terms of what the jobs are and what the hazards are. When it's done, go to the next one. Now, consider all the tools. I mentioned this before. Are they using, 22 shell nail driver? Can't think of powdered actuated tools. There, I knew I was going to get it. There's a standard for that. Powdered actuated tools. So you need to know that, and that you need to have a written program. So if you see them using those things, bingo, that's something you'd write down. Chemicals. Are they using any kind of solvents? Are they involved with changing chemicals in a machine? Are you in, do you do electroplating or galvanizing or anything like that, where you're using solvents in big tanks or any kind of chemicals? Each one of those there may be individual standards for specific chemicals, or there's always the Hazard Communication Program, which, by the way, is the #1 most commonly cited standard in OSHA. Then consider the job activity. How are they doing it? Is it all mechanized and there's no way they can be exposed to the belts and pulleys and chains and whatever? And or are they doing it in an open manner where there's nothing there to guard them? Then you go on to identify the regular tasks and the occasional tasks. What is the job like 90% of the time? But what could occasionally happen? So they're doing this job and all of a sudden they run into this situation, so now they have to switch over to this. And those are where you, again, back to that job description, identify the tasks as well as those occasional tasks. And then finally, for this one job description, you make a written list of the hazards identified. Then you move on to the next job. Now, in the process of doing this, let's go back to the belts and pulleys and chains thing that I mentioned before. If you see that, you don't have to write a written program for that particular activity, but what OSHA wants you to do is guard them. Instead of writing up a written program, if you identify a hazard and there's a way to, quote, engineer out the hazard through guarding, by proximity, barrier, physical guarding, whatever, eliminate the hazard and you can just cross that right off the list. You don't have to have a program for it. There is a guarding standard, and all it does is says that if you have had the guarding hazards, anything that rotates or is an open wheel or whatever like that, it's fairly simple, you need to guard them. That's what it says. And the program for that particular one would be, when you identify them, you fix them. Again, not a huge thing, but the big thing is you go to engineering controls. You only have to write a written program if, from the perspective of maintaining or modifying or observing those things that might pop up on that particular one. So that's step one. Now, how long that's going to take? Good question. I get most of my questions that I get today and these days working with Houseman Johnson I've been here 13 years, is that small contractor or that small company getting a call from OSHA or OSHA visits, and they get a citation for not having a written safety program, and all of a sudden they need help. Now I need to have a written safety program because I got a $3,000 fine here. Well, fix it, make it better. Give it a pill and it'll get better. No, it's got to be done. There's no question about it. You got to do it, and it is not a quick and easy task. It's something that has to take time. So again, what I just showed you is one part of this process. Next step. So now we go back and we look to see what regulations address each hazard. And again, keep in mind that we are going back to either 1910 or 1926, whichever your business is. So if we go to ladders, let's say ladders is a big one for you right now. You've got that list of hazards for those job descriptions. You start looking through the standard. They're all available online on www.osha.gov. OSHA has a very good webpage. It actually is one of the best I've ever seen for a government webpage. A lot of material, enormous amounts of material there. There are programs there. There are training guides, whatever. So you identify the hazard based upon, or I should say the scope upon the, regulation for the hazard. Now, almost all of OSHA's regulations have a scope. Now, what is the scope? The scope defines what the standard covers. And it's usually the first paragraph or second paragraph. And if your activity is falling outside of the scope of that standard, even though that hazard would appear to exist, that standard does not apply to you. So always remember to look first at the scope and read it. You could say, you know, if OSHA asks, why don't you have a standard? Well, what we do falls outside the scope of the standard. You need to know those regulations as much as the compliance officers do, frankly. So again, then you go back and you identify the hazard based upon the scope. Then if your hazard is covered by the scope of the standard, you need to comply with that standard. There's no questions asked. You need to. If you don't, you're out of compliance. Now, you go back and you do, this is where the written program comes in for that particular one. Let's take respirators. If you are using respirators, you are covered under 1910-134. Now, interestingly enough, there is a construction standard, but it refers right back over to the general industry standard. In other words, OSHA didn't want to write two different standards for two different programs. They wrote one big one for the 1910 industry, which is manufacturing, general industry, and everybody else refers to that. So you go into that 1910-134, and it gives you all the specific requirements of a written program for the use of respirators. And this is where you would start seeking out templates. I have one. Like I said, OSHA Consultation has one. OSHA can give you one. There are all kinds of these out there. Do not buy one. And you don't have to start one from scratch. You do have to read one. So you call me up and you say, can I have a template for a written respiratory program? Sure, I'll send it over to you. It's a Word document. All you have to do is put your name on it and the company's name, and you got a program. No. You've got one step. You have the written document, but now you have to go the next level, and that is the process of implementing that particular standard. Again, keep on mind the respiratory standard. Each regulation requires a specific, for lack of a better term, I call them SOP, or standard operating procedure, to control the exposure to the hazard. Now again, I'm making the assumption here that you have not been able to engineer out the control. You haven't been able to get rid of the hazard, or engineer out the hazard. You haven't been able to eliminate the hazard. That's your first choice. Always try to eliminate the hazard. Just spend the money, get a new guard. Let's take, for instance here, a press brake. For those of you who don't know what they are, they're big hydraulic machines with a blade that comes down and it bends metal in a certain way. OSHA wants to see a light curtain, which is an electric eye, creates a curtain in front of that blade so that an employee cannot stick their hand within 4 inches of the blade. It shuts it down. Now, you've got a press brake that's probably 20 or 30 years old. Are you expected to go out and immediately buy a light curtain? I tell people, contact the manufacturer of that piece of equipment. This works for newer ones better than the older ones. But if you can find the manufacturer of a 20 or 30-year-old one, contact them and say, have you developed fixes for that particular, the 2300 press brake, dynamic press brake? And if the manufacturer says, yes, we do, we have updates to that, and it'll cost you $10,000 to $12,000 to buy that, and it will bring you into compliance with OSHA. There you go. You've got it done. You're going to have to spend the money. That means you're buying something that meets manufacturer's requirements. And it's being, and even go so far as to have the manufacturer's rep come over and install it for you. If you cannot get any kind of aftermarket fixes, guards for that press brake, you got to get rid of it. You're going to have to junk it and buy a new one, because the new ones all come compliant. That's a sad reality. I know businesses are short on the margins are always narrow. Businesses don't have enough money. But keep in mind that if that 30-year-old press brake is not guarded, you can have multiple hazards. You could have an amputation. You could have an OSHA visit. You have an amputation, you will get an OSHA visit, and you will be looking at probably $7,000 to $10,000 in fines. So there you go. That's the cost of the update. So you can't avoid it. It will get you. And it comes in terms of the injury to the employee, which you don't want. So go back, develop that exposure control plan. How are we going to prevent an employee from being hurt by the hazard in that particular task? Next, work rules. This is one, if you've had an opportunity to work with our HR consultants, Mary Jo Speakerman and Amy Esri, this is an area where HR and health and safety are talking all the time about it. And it seems, it amazes the three of us that businesses will go to the step of developing a safety program, but not implementing it or not requiring the employees to follow those rules. Joe has been told not to put his hand in that particular machine. If it gets jammed when you're pulling the paper out, he's supposed to hit the stop button and call maintenance, and maintenance will come over and do it. Now, Joe is trying to do his best. He's trying to be a good employee. He reaches inside, pulls out that paper, and darn it all, his hand doesn't get cut off. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, are you going to discipline him for that? You should. Even though he's lost a hand, it was his choice. The human mind only learns through consequence and reward. That's how we learn things. That's how we were raised as kids. As adults, we think the same way. If you have all these safety procedures, you have to set up work rules, and they have to become mandatory. The employee must follow these work rules. You have to train them on them, and you have to give them the opportunity to read the rules, and then you have to be prepared to discipline people if they don't follow them. Sad as it seems, if a 45-year-old male employee decides not to follow the rules and he hurts himself, that's not your fault, that's his fault. But if you don't discipline him, it becomes your fault. It's the way the rules work. Go back to, if you think in terms of the first report of injury, first report of incident, I guess it is, workers' comp document. Up in the first column, I think it's on the right side of that document, there are two little boxes. One of them says, was this injury the result of a violation of a work rule? I'm kind of paraphrasing there. Even workers' comp recognizes it. So if you check that box that the employee did not follow the rules and has been disciplined, in Wisconsin, workers' comp will not pay the lost time component of their of that claim. They will only pay the medical side of it if you can show that the employee violated the work rule. And again, if you don't have a progressive discipline program and all the components of that, you can't prove that. You've got to have that program itself. So part of the work rules, you've got to go so far as to develop a progressive discipline program to ensure that the employees do follow the rules. And again, if you talk to our HR consultants, they will help you do that in terms of the HR rules and whatever. Now, you take those rules. Once you've gotten them all done, let's see, for a particular hazard, you develop a set of work rules. Back to the respirator. There are a set of one-liners. You will not wear a respirator, will not have a full beard when you have a respirator. Wear a respirator, something like that. No questions, just you will not have a beard if you're going to wear a respirator. That becomes a work rule. And you put that in a set of rules under respiratory program. That's a safety program. You've just done it right there. You've identified the hazard, you wrote up the solution, and you've made it a you will not. Work rules alone do not constitute a safety program, though they are, quite honestly, the next step. Work rules, again, this next slide, the note on progressive discipline. This is what I've just been talking to you about. Work rules, they're not going to do anything. They don't mean anything if you're not prepared to enforce. And I've just lectured you on that part of it. If there's no written rules, whether it's with OSHA or whether it's with workers' comp, the employer is at fault. If everything is with written rules and procedures and the employee fails to follow the rules, then the employee is at fault. And I mentioned the first report of incident in the box indicating that, and that provision as far as not paying the medical side of it. Finally, the last thing is that OSHA has, now this is something that's very political. OSHA does have within its documentation what's called unavoidable employee misconduct. So it's a little complicated. There are four or five provisions to this particular argument. This is an argument that an employer can make. But it flip-flops. If we have a Democratic administration in the White House, OSHA does not allow you to, or they make it very difficult for you to argue this. If we have a Republican administration in the White House, OSHA is much less touchy-feely, much easier to work with, and they will listen to you. Sadly, that's the way OSHA operates. It is like most federal government programs or any government program, it's driven politically. So what you have to do, let's say you've got, like I said, Joe reaches inside that printing machine and it's jammed, so he reaches inside there to grab that piece of paper when he knows he shouldn't because he's been properly trained on it, and chooses to do it anyway, then, and he gets hurt. Now, you go back and you say, we have a workers', I just got lost. I'm trying to find my training slide here. We have a progressive discipline program. We implement it. Joe was disciplined the day after. He was given a written warning in his personnel file that he violated the rule in doing that. Again, it's not a comfortable situation. Here's a guy who lost his hand, and you're going to write him up for it? Well, you've got to. He did. He broke the rule. Remember, 98% of all injuries in a workplace are a result of a choice. And it's the employee that makes that choice, not the employer. It's the employee that makes the choice. Do I or don't I? I didn't, therefore I got hurt. I broke the rules. So again, with OSHA, we have the program. He was disciplined. And here's evidence to show that we have disciplined other employees in the past for breaking a work rule. Then you can make the claim that you have the existing program and employees, you can make the claim it's an unavoidable employee misconduct. It's not a sure thing. You're not always going to win on it, but you know, it may work. It's worth the argument to do so. Training requirements. Okay, last step. Now, you've got a program. Keep in mind, we're doing one regulation, one hazard, one job description. I'm sorry. You can go back and say, after you've done all the job descriptions, you can group them together. So every job that uses ladders, you can train all those employees on that particular use of a ladder. You can do the ladder training on it. So we go back, and now we're going to train the employees on the provisions of that safety program for ladder safety. And once they're trained, they're supposed to follow the rules. Now, many people have often asked me, well, how often do I have to renew that training? Is there an annual refresher? Quite honestly, there are very few regulations. How do I get to that? There are very few regulations that have an annual renewal. What I've done here is this document here. This is OSHA standard, or OSHA publications, OSHA 2254. And this is the document right here. You can get it right off their webpage, which shows the training requirements for each and every regulation that's out there. And I think you'll find there's very few of them that have an annual refresher. Sadly, in my cynical sense, as I get older, I get more cynical. If you're not aware of the presence of this particular document, you're subject to or vulnerable to safety consultants that you hire that'll come in and say, well, we've got to do that training annually, and they'll come in, they'll charge you each time for it, when you really don't have to do it. Typically, you train the employee once when they're being introduced to the job and the hazard, and then you train them again whenever they break a rule or get hurt or do something wrong through observation. You retrain them. And that's supposed to do it. You show them what they're supposed to do, and if they break it, you train them again. Not annual, whenever. Forklift training. We all know that it's an every 3 year. I find that particular one interesting because the regulation always said such as renewed or refresher training for forklift operators shall be on a periodic basis, such as every 3 years. Well, now OSHA took the such as out. Didn't tell anybody, as I know, and as far as I know. And now that becomes a requirement. Can you flip back to the other one? So it's every 3 years. So the first thing you do with forklift training is you do a full classroom and skills test. Then 3 years later, as far as the refresher training, you just do the skills test. You don't have to do the classroom again. Now keep in mind, OSHA regulations and OSHA rules are minimal requirements. You can always go above and beyond. If you want to train in the classroom every 3 years, that's your choice. But it's not required. It's a should rather than a shall. So you saw the publication, OSHA 1910, or OSHA publication 2254, and that'll get you the training requirements that OSHA requires. Now, we set up a training program. So we have a new program, written respiratory protection. We're going to start implementing that. It will take us 2 to 3 months to implement the training and the testing and all the things that go along with it. And we'll implement it and we'll train, and by this date it will be fully implemented, and everybody will sign off on the work rules, they'll sign off on understanding, and this becomes a formal rule. Then you go back over to that next job description and you process the same thing. Is there any new hazard in there that you haven't already addressed, or is it still the same tasks and hazards that were in the first one? Then you can cross that one off. You need to always include the work rules in that training to make sure that they understand that this is an expected behavior. Safety is behavior. That's all it is. And again, you make behavior change by reinforcing good behavior and punishing bad behavior. We can't get away from that human. That's a human aspect. Finally, when you actually have the training done, you need to document it and keep it in writing, including the name of the training program, the date it was conducted, and the names of all the employees that were present. Do they have to sign that document? No. There was a lawsuit many years ago, perhaps 20, 30 years ago, started by a union. I'm not sure what the details of it, but they were saying that it wasn't right for the employee to be forced to sign a training document. So OSHA came back and said, fine, you're paying them that day, just give us a payroll record to show that they were on the clock for that particular thing, and that's all we have to see. But again, if they want to sign it, fine. If they don't want to sign it, no big deal. They're on the payroll record anyway. But you got to keep that training record. OSHA shows up. Do you have a written respiratory protection program for that respirator I saw hanging on the wall? Yes, we do. Here's our written respiratory protection program. Do you have training that these employees were, evidence that these employees were trained on it? Well, yeah, we did training last week. Well, do you have evidence? If you don't have that document, you've got nothing. Do you have evidence? Yes, here's our training document. Here's the names of everybody that was on there. This is evidence that we did that. That's all they need. That's why you've got to have that document on all of this that everybody was trained on. And again, you do it progressively. Each standard, each program, each hazard, however you want to break it down. I broke it down in terms of job description and hazards, and then identifying the regulations that go with it. You got to have this structure. If you don't follow a structure, you're going to get lost, because the demands on doing this take so much time, and you've got to do it. Interestingly enough, I wonder, the OSHA standard came out in 1973. I knew it was the year I graduated from college. Search my age. And how many companies out there that you know of that do not have a written safety program? Or they don't have all the documentation that goes with it? How many years have we been doing this, and we've been dealing with OSHA, and we haven't done it because it is such a time-consuming task? Take small bits. It could take several years to complete. You could hire a consultant to do this for you if you wanted to do that. Hire them for make them a part of your staff for 2 to 3 years. They can do it really quickly because they've already done it. You're going to spend the money for it. But you ask yourself the question, okay, so now once we have the written programs in and everything established in the progressive discipline, who's going to make sure that it continues to happen? Somebody's got to maintain it. Writing it and developing it is one thing. Maintaining it and enforcing it is another. There is not a single shortcut that you can do this any easier. I mentioned the generic safety program with the 3-ring binder. You can buy one of those, but you have not gone through, if you don't use chromium metal in your business, why do you need a program for chromium control? You're going to have stuff in there that really doesn't relate to you, and on top of that, once you have accepted that as your program, you've got to start doing it. That means you've got the hazard out there, and that means to OSHA, you're not doing it. You bought it, but you're not doing it. So that's why there's a danger behind those generic safety programs. Prioritize your hazards. Take the biggest ones first. Ladders, elevated work surfaces, machine guarding, respirator protection, the silica standard for construction people, that's coming up, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's the 23rd of this month that is going to be implemented. Rick Barton and I are busy as can be right now getting our contractors up to speed who've delayed until the very last minute to start doing it. Again, human nature. Prioritize your hazards. If that's something that you do every day, if you're working with concrete, you need to have, that's a big priority, believe me. OSHA and OSHA consultation have additional sources for help. I will mention OSHA consultation. If you want OSHA consultation to do this for you, it's a free service. OSHA consultation is a state agency. It's not associated with the federal government other than the fact that OSHA pays 50% of their budget or provides 50% of their budget. They don't communicate with OSHA directly. There's no, that's not allowed. It's free for any employer with 250 employees or less. If you want to call them up and say, we need help in developing our program, they will do that. But you're looking at a 6 to 9 month delay before they'll ever get out to you because they are so busy. People are finding out that they're out there. I used to work for the consultation program, and those 6 to 8 consultants are busy all the time. Everybody's asking for everything, and it's so again, it's a good resource, but it's not available. Okay, we are now at the question and answer phase. If anybody wants to write in and start asking questions, I will respond to you.
All right, so the first question we have is from Elaine, and she asks, is Wisconsin the only state that will not pay lost time for injury as a result of violation of work rules?
I can't, you can ask that of our claims department, our claims counselors. The only one that it's not an area of my expertise. I just know that that came through our claims department. That Wisconsin is the one that's doing that right now. I suspect there are others, but I can't tell you which ones they are. So I would call either Susan Dorsch or Peg Kramer. Peg Kramer. Those are our two ladies in the claims department, and ask them that question. They'll answer just like that as to who's covered by that. Next question.
While you guys are typing your questions in, I have pulled up Rich's contact information So as you are reviewing information that he went through today, if questions arise later, you can reach out to him by phone or by email. Doesn't look like.
I must have done really good there.
Yeah. We'll give you all about another minute or so to type in any questions that you may have. And I will also pull up the SHRM and HRCI credits in about a minute. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Rich, for sharing all this really helpful information. And hopefully, our clients and our other attendees can put that into use in their companies.